Hello and welcome to probably one of the most wishy-washy psychology videos that are going to end up on this channel. This is Freud. Um, so basically, Freud ended up doing a case study on one of his followers' children. This means Hans is little Hans, he called him. He was a boy whose behaviours, the study centered around phobia he developed when he was 5 years old with horses, and there were a few other phobias which I'll come to later, such as laden carriages. Um, this was a strange one. Um, we first have to sort of understand Freud's theory of the psychosexual stages of development, for which I have a lovely worksheet. Um, if you'll give me a moment, I shall find it. So here we go. From ages 0 to 2, you had the oral stage, which used the mouth as a pleasure source. It was sort of basically this was his ways of saying how certain personality traits they have. So if they were overly orally fixated, they would become too trusting, too gullible. Um, yeah, ignore that. However, if right, if they liked sucking and swallowing, they became too trusting, gullible, and easily fooled. If they liked chewing and biting, they became sarcastic and verbally aggressive, and that they would become compulsive eaters, drinkers, or smokers as well, which is particularly nice. This is, yeah. Then you had between the ages of 2 to 4, you had the anal stage, which was all about feces. Um, Anal retentives became, in his opinion, they would become sort of all obsessed about orderliness and cleanliness and sort of being very uptight and holding things close. However, expulsives become overgenerous and quite un- untidy, and they would be less attached to material possessions. Uh, and this Freud suggested that you would either become retentive or expulsive based on the severity of your potty training. If it was strict, you would become retentive and then be all sort of, you know, uptight and hold things and stuff. Yeah. And if it was relaxed, you would become expulsive and very, ooh, I do not care. Uh, then it comes to 45 years old, and that was the phallic stage, which you run away. Um, this was sort of became, according to Freud, a very confusing time in which the children became afraid of their parents because they thought their father was going to castrate them and they loved their mothers. And that was only for boys. I mean, girls blamed their mothers for letting them be castrated, apparently. Also, you would see the rise of the Oedipus complex and the Electra complex here, which is the idea that they would want to, well, they loved their parent of the opposite gender, which is a very strange concept, which only Freud could have come up with. Anyway, from the age of 6 up to puberty, it was called a latency period in which all the sexual feelings were suppressed and sort of never came back. Infantile amnesia makes children forget about their sexuality, and they put all their sexual focus into sort of social stuff and into intellectualism. Um, anyway, then puberty onwards, it's a return to sexuality and stuff like that. Yeah, so that was like sexual stages of development and the Oedipus complex and everything formed. So basically, few important things to say because it's just going to be I can't cover everything in this because it would just take too long and YouTube wouldn't let me. Um, Firstly, you'd have Hans, aged 2.5, was warned by his mother not to touch his whittler, otherwise she'd call Dr. A to come and chop it off. Which isn't the kind of thing you say to a child. Neither is, don't you have one too, when talking about a whittler, and then saying, of course, dear. That's not a normal thing to say to your child, but apparently that's what little Hans's mom said. So, yeah. Um, Other things to talk about in this are Hans's little sister. He hated her, according to the data that Hans's father collected. Bearing in mind all the data was collected by Hans's father, who was a Freud follower, so would have been trying to confirm everything Freud said about his own son, which hmm. So yeah, um, he when his mother became pregnant with Hannah, his little sister, he started getting afraid of her being taken away from him rather, to focus on another child. Um, he had fantasies about giraffes, and he would take the crumpled giraffe away and sit on it when the big giraffe stopped crying out. This was suggested by Freud that it was kind of he wanted his mother's attention and wanted to take her away from his father, which was all part of the Oedipus complex, wanting to take his father out of the picture and just have him and his mother. It was also said that he fantasized about having a plumber come and sort of bore a hole into his stomach, which was quite a strange one. And there was also the plumber fantasy where later on, after his sort of problems with his mother had been resolved, he dreamt that his things, his villa and his bum got replaced with bigger ones by a plumber in the bar. Yeah, so at the ages of 5, Hans had started freaking out a lot about stuff. Firstly, he had developed a phobia of horses, which Freud suggested was linked, sort of a way of relieving the phobia of not moving his phobia of his yeah his phobia of masturbation to another thing because his mother had told him not to. He associated that with the father or mother he heard telling their daughter not to touch a horse, otherwise it would bite him. So he became afraid of horses. Also, Freud suggested that horses that Hans was most afraid of, big white horses with a black mouth and blinkers, looked like his dad, and that's why he was afraid of them because he was afraid of his dad. Also, another interpretation was that they looked like surgeons, and obviously Hans didn't like surgeons because unpleasant experience. Actually, no, I don't think that was a Hans one. That was more of a behaviourist one. But anyway, uh, also he became afraid of heavily laden carriages and buses and furniture vans and stuff like that. And Freud suggested all manner of things about this. He suggested it was about excretion and people getting off the bus and how he was afraid of that. He was afraid that he had seen that the buses represented his mother, his being pregnant, and he also suggested that more sensibly, when a horse fell down, he thought it would die, and that's also why he was afraid because he thought that his mother being pregnant would kill her, which is a safe assumption. Um, but no. Anyway, basically, eventually, Hans got to a little triumph fantasy of his, where his father became the grandfather of his children, and he had married his mother, which I wouldn't say is much of a triumph fantasy as much as he's still a little bit weird. But yeah, that's Freud. That's all I'm doing with Freud because Freud is just too whacked out and strange.